Hey, Kim, thank you. Really appreciate you coming to speak today. So I know it's been a long day, but I'm thrilled that we've got Eric Goldstein, who's agreed to come and give a closing keynote. For those who don't know Eric, he serves as the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at CISA, where he leads CISA's mission to protect and strengthen federal civilian agencies and the nation's critical infrastructure against cyber threats. You recall earlier today, we issued our report card from the Better Identity Coalition, where there weren't a lot of great grades, but CISA got an A for the More Than a Password campaign and the great work they've been doing on the MFA front. Previously, Eric was the head of cyber policy, strategy, and regulation at Goldman Sachs. He also served at CISA's precursor agency, the NPPD, National Protection and Programs Directorate, in a number of leadership roles. Really thrilled he could be here today. I will invite him up now, and we'll hear from him a bit, and then we'll have a reception right after. So thank you.
All right. Good to see everybody. If I were to create a word map of the most common phrases that I say in a month, the most common phrase would be, "Thank you, Venable, for hosting me for this wonderful event." It is great to be back, both with the Venable team and at the Identity Policy Forum. It's a really it's an exciting time to be here. You know, when I was thinking about what I wanted to say for these remarks, particularly given that this is the end of a lengthy day, you have already heard from such government luminaries as my friend and colleague Caitlin Clark, my friend and colleague Chris DeRusha. What could I say that would live up to that high bar? The answer is nothing, so I'm not going to try. I will just do my best for this end of day forum. I also want to keep it a little bit conversational because, again, it is the end of the day, and I'm also keeping all of you from the happy hour, which, having just walked by, it looks lovely. So I will try to keep it snappy and interactive. I think the interesting tension that we face at the end of this event is reflecting simultaneously on how far we've come and yet the increasing gravity of the challenge that we're facing. And I think that is very well reflected in the Better Identity report, which I had the privilege of reading this past week, which shows some really strong areas of progress, hashtag more than a password, but also some areas of real needed growth. But I do think that it's worth starting out just with some reflection on how far we have come in moving towards a passwordless future, in moving towards an environment where FIDO2 is in fact the de facto standard for enterprises around the world seeking to modernize their identity and authentication stacks. And it's worth reflecting that even a couple of years ago, the concept of an organization going passwordless would have in most circles been laughable, right? It was sort of taken as a de facto truth that we will have passwords forever. And you know, moving to SMS two-factor was seen as the big innovation. Maybe that's as far as we'll ever go. And now the fact of the matter is we are seeing technologies like passkeys being used by consumers for everyday activities. We are seeing more and more enterprises moving passwordless for their enterprise, their privilege, their admin, their employee authentication solutions. And that's a remarkable shift. Now, of course, it is still only a tiny slice of the overall authentication and identity environment, but it is still remarkable that what was once seen as a fantastical left field idea is now increasingly moving on the wall. And not a moment too soon, because we also know that identity and authentication is the target of every sophisticated attacker in every attack. As I was thinking this afternoon about this event, I reflected on the fact that every significant breach that I can think of that I have been a part of responding to over the past 3 years has an identity and authentication component to it. Whether that's a password spray or cred stuffing attack against an account that wasn't using MFA, whether it's some of the MFA fatigue attacks that we've seen from groups like Lapsus, whether it is more sophisticated attacks like the compromise of Microsoft Exchange Online, seeking to compromise and forge identity tokens. We are seeing, as the new cyber cliche has it, identity is indeed the new perimeter. And so the more that we can focus on driving this evolution, driving this modernization with all due urgency, we are going to be responsive to, not even getting ahead of, where we already see the attackers going every day. And so where do we go next, right? How do we make progress in this environment? At CISA, we are really eager to work with the community on a few key areas. The first is, how can we make this transition as frictionless as possible? And so we know that in many cases, as I mentioned, we're really excited to see passkeys beginning to roll out for consumers. But we know that in some places, it is not always a perfectly consumer optimized experience. We are seeing platforms where passkeys roll out for mobile, but not for web, or we are seeing passkeys roll out where you still have to use an SMS push to authenticate with your passkey. And we think that's because, and this is just hypothesis, in many cases, it is forward-thinking, innovative security and identity teams who are pushing passkeys and pushing FIDO2 compliant phishing resistant MFA as the right way to go, but they are facing friction from product teams, from business teams who haven't yet seen the light. And so we're seeing a little bit of a hodgepodge of solutions being pulled together that I think is perhaps inherent to where we are in our phase of maturation, but also reflects a broader truism. And that's that this transition can't be an issue for the security team. It can't be an issue for the identity team. It has to be a core business imperative. But the beauty here is, I say this a lot in a lot of different security contexts, and saying security control X needs to be a business imperative and the CEO and the board need to care. It's actually much easier in this space because moving to FIDO2, moving to passwordless authentication, yes, it's great for security, but it also has such extraordinary benefits for customer and user experience. And so if we can lean in as a community to say, let's front run the customer experience aspect here, and let's make this a business differentiator where no one likes passwords, no one likes push MFA. I sure as heck don't. Let's make this an issue for business leaders, chief executives, board directors to say, this is how we differentiate in the market and make our product more fun to use, more easier to use, more frictionless. And by the way, we're going to wipe out classes of attacks on our customers and on our infrastructure. That's great, but there's a business driver first and foremost. And there actually aren't that many security controls or security modernization uplifts where we can make that argument and it really resonates. This is one of them. And so we hope in the year ahead that we can move the conversation a bit to take it out of the silos of extraordinary, passionate, and talented identity and security practitioners and move it into being a business conversation where companies can innovate and compete on the modernity of their identity and authentication mechanisms and use that to further drive and accelerate progress. But this progress will only occur if we focus on one key pillar of CISA's Secure by Design guidance, which is radical transparency. Because one of the biggest challenges that we face in this space, and we appreciate the kudos about our More Than a Password campaign, our biggest challenge in that campaign is to say, how are we doing? What is the percentage of consumer accounts that today require MFA, period? How many of those require phishing resistant MFA? How many of those are using FIDO2 compliant methods? How about on the enterprise? How many admin and privilege users are required to use the right kinds of MFA? How many enterprise users generally? There's no good data out there. We are seeing some companies begin to do what we think is the right thing, which is to say, here is where we are on our journey. Here is how we are nudging, pushing both customers and enterprise users to opt in to secure MFA. But it's still happening in silos. And until we solve that challenge, it's going to be really hard for us to know as a community, where are we on this journey, right? What is the waypoint we are on? And are things getting better or getting worse? Because frankly, although I'm grateful for the A, because anytime government gets an A on anything, it's a wonderful day in Washington, D.C. But I want an asterisk next to that A, because yes, we have a great campaign. We have our director has a great Twitter account. We are pushing the cause, but how are we actually doing? Are more Americans actually using MFA today than when we began that campaign a year ago? I hope so. I think so. I don't know. And if I don't know, then it's difficult for us to be able to say, are the levers we are deploying actually useful? And so one of our call to actions for the year ahead is for every enterprise to say publicly in a blog post, in a white paper, whatever it may be, their strategy for driving to 100% FIDO2 or phishing resistant MFA for all customers, all privileged users, and all employees, and to acknowledge, listen, we're not there today. Almost nobody is there today, unless you are a very special cloud native company that can do things with some degree of scale and rapidity. But here is how we're going to get there. That is something I will say with full transparency, we've been struggling with in the government, right? As I'm sure everybody in this room is tracking, there was a requirement in Executive Order 14028 for the federal government to adopt universal MFA for all users, all systems, all accounts. And that's been a real challenge, in part because we're dealing with issues like legacy technology, constrained resources, systems compatibility issues, the same challenges that every enterprise outside of government is dealing with every day as well. And so I think we can do a better job in being transparent about the issues that we are seeing in embarking upon this journey. But we have to have the call to action for every organization to do the same, because the end goal shouldn't be that we expect perfection, we expect conclusion in the next year, but the end goal should be, I hope, that when Jeremy writes the Better Identity at 6 years or 10 years report, that we have actual data to base it on, where we can actually say, here is how we are doing, here is the progress we are making, and here are the constraints that we are seeing. At CISA, we are really excited to be a partner to the community in this journey, in part to be maybe the loudest voice in some rooms, arguing for the importance of this work, being able to say with an authoritative voice, here is how attacks happen, and here is why we know that these approaches can knock out classes of attacks that are harming Americans and American businesses every single day, and then help to shine a light on the constraints that are limiting forward progress and limiting forward adoption. We're not going to have the tools to fix those constraints unilaterally, but if we can shine a light on them together, that will help us think through the broader solutions that we can bring to bear and have come into play. So with that, I will thank you for your collegiality and time at the end of a very long day. You are all to be commended for the work that you are doing, for the change that you are driving. I think even though the report card is mixed, the results for the country are not, and we are seeing change that again would have been unthinkable, certainly 10, even 5 years ago. That doesn't mean that we don't have a long way to go, but I hope as each of you have the drink of your choice at the happy hour, you can at least toast to progress, even as you take a sip for the hard work yet to come. And with that, with Jeremy's indulgence, I'm glad to field a question or two, or we can vacate to the happy hour lobby at your discretion.
You're saying I should give you an A-. Any questions?
With an asterisk. It is the end of a long day. You want my feelings? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
So that is the end of a long day. You all have really been troopers in sticking it out. Usually the events we have here, not everybody stays this long. Although I warned our events team, like, we're going to be going strong all day. Just wanted to say first, thanks to all of you for coming. Also wanted to thank the Venable events team, particularly Bree, Vincent, the man in the back who's making all the magic happen. Also our friends from Glen Echo Group who have been supporting us with social media and also the live stream throughout the day and helping run the microphones around. It took a lot of people to make this all happen. Look, I always point out I'm exhausted whenever this event's done, but I feel good about doing it every year because identity is such a complicated issue. If this was just about security, we would have solved this a long time ago. It's how do we balance that with so many other things in terms of usability, interoperability, privacy, equity. It's a tough problem to solve, and there aren't always easy solutions. Our goal in this event is to do as much as we can to shine a light on every different perspective of it. And so I hope that today you'll leave here thinking that maybe you learned something new or heard a perspective you had not heard before. And just want to thank all of you for your support and your partnership. And let's make this year a great year. Thanks, everybody.